Okay, now we can begin. So I will be talking today really about one thing, which is taking experience seriously and um, um, current work towards formalizing and codifying experience, especially and specifically musical experience. So most of this lecture will involve exercises, listening exercises. So be prepared to use your ears and reflect or introspect. Okay, so just a quick bio. I'm Matthew Chung, a Ph.D. student, as Jingwei said. Currently, I'm researching formalizing musical experience with formal ontologies and generalized subjective listening tests. I'm working on a piece of software called MUS, and formal ontologies. I don't expect many people to have heard of them, but they are used, for example, in biology. There's something called a gene ontology, where all gene behavior is modeled in terms of like 3 different mechanisms. And so you have these libraries, these big databases of empirical data represented in terms of this 3-part framework. And so formal ontologies are basically these categories or concepts that we use to break down a domain. So I'm trying to do that with musical experience, which is sort of unusual. I mean, many people are trying to do this, but experience is sort of difficult to work with, because how do you access experience? Well, introspection, reflection, right? So, there's some inherent difficulties there. So my focus, you can just say it's applied philosophy, or that's probably the best thing. And there's my SoundCloud if you want to hear some music that I make. Okay, so let's begin right away with an exercise called audiation. I'll explain I'll explain the history of the word later, but it's something you all know how to do. It's when you re-experience a memory of sound without hearing the sound. You can say it's using your inner ear, your inner hearing, your mind's ear, right? These are all ways of talking about the same thing. You're conjuring a sound in your head, but you're not listening to the sound. And that's something that musicians, I'll talk more about it later. But let's listen right now to this Beethoven opening excerpt here, and just try this. Just try this exercise. We're just diving right in, and then I'll explain a bit more, and we'll do it again. So don't worry if this is moving quickly. There's no wrong way to do this. So here we go. Did everyone hear that? Or was that? Okay, great. So this requires some care. It's sort of subtle, this whole exercise, right? It's like meditation. If you if you want blinking lights to say you've done it correctly, it's not going to happen that way, right? So that went by really quickly, right? But just try your best to recall the exact sound that you just heard. And Here's like a first example of a question. How many discrete sort of pieces or parts make up that memory? Does anyone just type it in chat? Like there's dum da dum, dum da dum, dum da dum. Okay, so most people are saying three. Great. So I'm glad we're already we've calibrated very well. People are saying three. This is already great. Like this is successful here that people are so I like that Kavya is saying there's four because there are actually okay, so there's actually four, and let's listen again and see if you can hear the fourth element. So yes, it depends on how you divide it, and so I don't want to say it's right or wrong. Let me be very careful. Most people are listening to this as three units, but you can also hear four units. That's all I want to say. I don't want to say there's, a right or wrong way. So try to listen to this now as four units and tell me what the fourth unit is, or try to describe it. Here we go again. Okay, so yeah, right, the drums. So again, this is I know it feels a little arbitrary at first, but one of the big lessons we're going to be learning is there isn't reality. Music doesn't tell you how to listen to itself, right? There's natural ways of listening to it, but ultimately we choose how we listen and we fix certain um, protocols for how we listen. And that's a big part of my research is formalizing these protocols for how to listen, right? Because some people hear three, some people hear four, right? What way are we listening? How are we going to talk about this, right? All that requires establishing contracts, basically social contracts is what you can think of it. They're called meta-epistemic contracts in my paper, but because you build your epistemology. Okay, so there's a lot behind this, but great. So everyone is on board. You can hear it as three, and you can hear it as four. I just want to now talk a little about ideation. We'll come back to this and do more of these exercises. So ideation is what you just did. It's the act of voluntarily generating auditory experiences in the absence of an external stimulus. That means voluntarily, you're doing this of your own volition, your free will, right? It's you're willful, you're exerting effort, right? You're generating this and in your mind, and there's no external stimulus. I didn't play the sound. But when you think back on it, when you tell me there's three parts, what you're doing is you're recalling and you're thinking about the sounds and you're, processing it in that way. But to be very precise, ideation is, yeah, selective attention is very relevant. Selective attention is sort of like a funnel or filter. And if you pay attention to, let's say, one instrument, and then um, your memories are shaped by your selective attention, right? So if you attend to, there's like a famous YouTube video of an ape running behind someone. Like, do people know this, right? But anyway, if you didn't pay attention, you won't have the memory of it happening, even though you saw it on the screen. Anyway, um, uh, so this is sometimes called inner hearing, mind's ear. Um, it's a foundational skill in all forms of musicianship. This is something that composers, performers, all musicians are trained in. The first year of your music bachelor's degree, you'll have a lot of this sort of stuff. And key figures who talk about this are people like Edwin Gordon, a music teacher, educator he's really just has a lot of theories of teaching, right? So he has this thing called music learning theory, big community behind it. And he's the one who coined the word audiation. It's also just called inner hearing. So I prefer audiation because I I find inner to be a little confusing, right? Yeah, all hearing is inner. I mean, I understand external is anyway. Uh, Zator, the guy cited here, is so this paper by Zator uh, is about what brain regions are activated when you do this exercise. So when you recall the Beethoven, your brain is lighting up in the same way as when you listen to it, the actual sound. Um, the same brain regions are activated, the auditory cortex. And there's some questions about what role it plays. Um, there's a correlation, but of course, so with visual imagery, when you recall a visual image, there is more certainty that yes, your brain is using the auditor is your visual cortex, using your visual cortex to uh, recall to generate these visual imagery, but it's just sort of a matter of rigor that um, I don't believe that's been established yet for auditory imagery. And yeah, auditory imagery is what this is called when you that sort of imprint in your mind. Arnold Schoenberg also talked about inner hearing, uh, and Piaget distinguished between imagery and perception, right? So these are all just there's already so much to talk about and so much research that is opened up just from this little exercise, right? We spent 30 seconds on this, right? Um, I want to do this again, just like all these exercises require a few separate trials. So let's listen again. Let's make it a little longer. Okay. You're going to be hearing the same fragment and then what follows after that, which is much more complex. It's sort of a fugal section. I'm sure most people know the Beethoven Symphony 9, right? And think just be prepared that you're trying to, you know, form an auditory memory of this. And there's going to be a lot of moving parts. So listen carefully. Let's listen. Okay, so I think that's enough. Um, and maybe we should listen. Okay, so just take a moment again and actually play through the entire excerpt that we just listened to. It's a little difficult, but just take your time, you know, deep breaths and think about the opening, right? Think about the exact sound of the strings and the timpani drum, and think about the spacing, right? Don't rush the memory. Just try to actually faithfully recreate it. And think about all those different voices. Sorry if I'm interrupting by talking over this. Think about the different entrances of the voices, right? This is getting difficult, right? I assume. And okay, so hopefully that's enough time and I wasn't distracting. Um, this is sort of an extra question. I don't expect people to know orchestration very well, but do people, how many voices were there in this fugal section, right? How many entrances were there? Does anyone want to just take a guess? This is, extra. They don't expect people to necessarily know that. Is this hard, or do people? 2, 3. So there's actually 4 again, right? 8. Okay, that's funny. Someone says 8. I mean, again, this is all my questions you will find are ultimately ambiguous. We have to always talk so much to just figure out what we're trying to point at, what we're extending to. This is called ostensive ambiguity. But there's 4. In fact, I want to show you a visualization of this piece. I suppose it's actually worth doing this right now. We're just on the first slide, but we're going to move maybe faster over. So there's 4, and there's so many questions that we can ask just listening to this. So I'll point out the 4. So let me just share again. Okay. Now, does everyone see this? And does everyone hear?
We all hear. Yeah.
Oh, do people hear it now? Okay, great. So this is a nice visualization, right? So these are all the answers. You can see there's 4 things here, right? Or again, we can think in terms of 4 things. There's a, this would be the 4th thing. You can also think in terms of many other things. That's something we'll talk about later with Nelson Goodman, right? So that's in the second first entrance was back here. Entrance 1, entrance 2, entrance 3. Oh, shoot. Okay, there's 5. Sorry, I got it wrong myself. Okay, there's 5 entrances. And one problem is that I can't hear any of my music. Right, so there's 5 entrances. And so everyone hears the strings, right? But do you hear, describe what else is going on? Because there's one other thing happening. Do you hear, let's listen again. Okay. Does anyone hear? So these are strings. Let's try to, the stuff going, the stuff that's continually moving are strings, right? Language is going to be so difficult this whole next 2 hours, but just bear with me. I'll just tell you the answer so that there's woodwinds, meaning flutes, oboes, and maybe horns. I don't quite remember the orchestration exactly, but you see these turquoise things. These are actually emphasis, like little punctuation marks that woodwinds are playing. You know how an orchestra is filled with a bunch of, all these different players, right? So there's a bunch of string players playing violins in the red, and then there's oboes and flutes and woodwinds who are emphasizing every 4th note here, right? Let's listen and see if you can hear that again. You hear that? There's even a little bit of reverb. Like the strings are going and doing their thing, and then there's right? Like that's just it's just something subtle that's going on the whole time. Do people hear that? Okay, great. Yeah, because I need my earbuds because I can't hear any of this. And so I'm like forced to do my own exercise and I have to like recall all of this from from memory. It's just like I'm comfortable doing. Okay, do people still hear? Um, sorry, okay. Uh, Things will smooth out after we fix this sort of Zoom issues. So let's just do people hear? Well, this is you will learn shortly that this is called non-aesthetic, this experience right now that we're having. Okay, does anyone hear that? Okay, okay. Um, it's non-aesthetic because there's interruptions, just like advertisements. John Dewey, we'll talk about John Dewey's definition of aestheticity. But so this presentation is okay. Anyone hear that? So frustrating. There's no logic to this. I'll put away this. Okay, great. I guess I just can't listen to my own examples. Typical Zoom problem. So let's get back to the slides here because we got a lot. We got 60 more slides to go. So right. So when you listen to that again in your mind, your brain is lighting up the same way. And this is just a special case of a much more general phenomenon called mental imagery, which is the act of either voluntarily or involuntarily generating perceptions in your mind without the stimulus. So, and it's very important to talk at this point about aphantasia, which is the inability to do this. Um, I think 4% of the population has this, and there's some other sort of factors that are co presenting. I forget what the term is, but like some other weird things happen to those people. And if you're one of them, that's totally fine. I think my dad actually is a bit, I don't know if he has amusia or something, but so this can affect different modalities, visual, auditory, and musical. Um, so yeah, I think we talked and here's a really important thing to notice. This was only talked about in 2015. I don't think that so I think Francis Galton talked about this like in the 1800s or something. But academically, like cognitive scientists only like and psychologists, right? They've only this paper where Zeman like introduced this whole aphantasia came out in 2015. So just you know um that's important to know about the state of the art right now that we are just beginning to take first person experiences seriously. Let me read the question here. Ability to generate these images by familiar with sound. Yes, I would definitely say just on first person um, experience, yeah, the more often you listen, the more clearly your mental images will be. The more you practice it, the more the clearer your mental images will be. Um, I don't know if it's quite, I don't know if that second sentence is true though, because familiar sounds, sometimes just we start to phase them out, right? We ignore them and we factor them out. But unfamiliar sounds sometimes are more striking, and we um like anomalies are actually more um they leave a stronger memory. So the conditions, I mean, they're complex, but what I want to emphasize again and again in this lecture is use your firsthand experience. So there's papers and there's research and there's anecdotes and there's all this third person theory, but the data, the evidence is first person subjective experience at the end of the day. Like that's what music is about. You won't find music somewhere out there, right? It's in your head. It's in your experience. So the every single exercise that we do is trying to codify and rigorize how we engage with our experiences. So um, think about maybe answer if you have questions, form hypotheses and answer them yourself. Actually, you have this instrument. It's another instrument, just like any other. It's very noisy, but it can be set up and calibrated in a reliable way, and that's why people agree on many things. Like, well, we'll talk about that later. Don't want to digress. So Uh, it's also okay. So aphantasia, right? And there's a diversity of abilities in general. Um, I mean, we could just talk from an evolutionary perspective, even, right? But just cognitively, experientially, right? Individuals differ widely in how they choose to engage with music, but also just in their underlying physiological capacities for engagement. And this isn't a bad thing. This is, you know, maybe what gives rise to so many unique voices in music, right? People just hear things differently. Some people have synesthesia, some people don't. Um, how much it's hard to know how much to emphasize this, but I'm going to say, based on my conversations with people about experiences in depth, like very, very detailed analyses of paintings, you know, like with my best friend, for example, for years we talked about paintings and we were on the same page, we noticed the same things. And only I think about a year ago did we discover that we have totally different perceptual, visual mechanics. He sees objects and I see textures, and that's sort of a little ambiguous, but basically, when I look at my visual field, I just see sort of a flat field of colors and textures, and I don't particularly like I notice edges, but I don't think in terms of screen, mouse, bottle of, water, keyboard. He sees objects just exclusively. And this is something that we had to talk through very carefully, and there's a lot of it's messy, right? Trying to figure out this pin this down. But you can do that if you have very careful conversations with people. They actually perceive things differently. And okay, so getting back on track. Everyone has different cognitive, like, so let's say perceptual. Start with perceptual, right? Everyone has different senses. The obvious case is some people are colorblind, some people hear or have perfect pitch, whatever, right? But what's more interesting is that people process that data differently as well. There's cognitive uh, differences in how people process music. Um, that can be shaped by culture. It can be shaped by conditioning and training. So musicians will hear things and process them differently. Like I hear the orchestration in this Beethoven excerpt. Um, you know, someone I think for example, um, when Japan was first opened to the world in the 1800s and they played Mozart string quartets, they thought it sounded like noise. It in and we're so conditioned to hearing tonal music and focusing on tones and the structure and the grammar of tonal music, right? But they thought it sounded like noise. So they were having the same sensory experiences perhaps, but the way they were putting them together was totally different. And I really want to encourage people, think about your own experiences and what glimpses you've had of other people's experiences and try to just verify this yourself. What you're doing here is more rigorous and more empirically valid than, reading a theory paper on this. You can actually look at the data and do this yourself. Of course, there's, some caveats, uh, you know, but always try to verify this yourself. So yeah, we talked about all this. Um, Varieties of mental acts, right? So everyone has different capacities, and shifting it into the first person perspective again. Everyone has different. You can do different things with your mind. That's the simplest way to put this. You can do many different things with your mind. You can attend to, let's say, the screen. You can attend to your your auditory experience right now. You can attend to a particular word on the screen, right? So attention is a huge part of it. You can, what do you feel about what I'm saying right now? Is this interesting or is this sort of mundane? Um, you know, you're are you too hot? Like I'm too hot right now. There's so much going on, right? And when you start to when you start to really think about first person experience carefully and separate all the pieces, like it's just a jungle, right? Um, for addition alone, Edwin Gordon, that guy with music learning theory, describes 8 types of audition, audiation, sorry, including perception, performance, composition, right? So let's try another exercise now, because I'll go back and forth between exercise and theory. Close your eyes and try to imagine a sound that you've never heard before. This is, make this meaningful for yourself. So, I'm not going to be able to give every single bit of the protocol here, but it can be a short sound and long sound, whatever, right? But just imagine a sound you've never heard before. This is harder than it sounds. Like I'm hearing the Beethoven again. I'm hearing woodwinds. Those are sounds I've heard, right? Imagine a sound that you've never heard before. Like try to make a new sound. And you're already doing a lot of stuff when you engage with this, right? So just take a moment to do this. Um, I'm not And I'm going to say personally, I can't say that I can do this, but I can put together sounds I have heard in new ways. So um, I was hearing sort of morphs between different timbres. Does anyone want to describe what they made up? Just type in chat anything that you find descriptive. Uh, if you feel this is too free form, just establish some method for yourself and follow it. Um, Dog whistle sound, very windy sound. Yeah, these are all great. Yeah, these are all great. Yeah, keep these are all what we're looking for here. So um, I was hearing just like a reverse cymbal sound and some like computer music sounds that I've heard, but I can't really validate that it's a totally new sound that I've never heard before. Maybe it's because as an electroacoustic musician, I've heard a lot of different sounds, and so I sort of collapse them into sounds that I've heard before. So I'm going to say if you explore a lot of timbres and synthesis, maybe you won't be able to say that it's something you've never heard before. Maybe it's a little, conceited to say, I've heard everything, but I can't really comfortably say I've never heard this sound I've imagined before. Um, After you listen to Stockhausen, you'll know. Uh, okay, cool. Throat singing, lava sounds. Yeah, this is great. Did um let's see if there's something interesting to ask about this. So I'm gonna check my notes. My notes here. You recruited a lot of different mental procedures when you did this exercise just right now. Um, just just think about that and reflect on that. Um, you had to draw on memories, perhaps, or synthesizing things, imagining them is a very challenging sort of process. And maybe we'll have more to say when we come back to that, but good work. So let's shift for a moment from all this internal, mind mental exercises and um, do some embodied exercises right now. So maybe, I sort of want to play some more music examples, but we're already at 43 minutes, so I want to move quickly. We'll just do this vocal imitation. So do people want to do the Beethoven again, or this maybe a different sound, a different thing? Looking. Okay, so let's listen to. Okay, it's a little tedious, but let's just do it in exercise. So it's such a good example. Okay, so just say ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, dun-da-da, dun-da. Right. So you can use syllables to do that. So is everyone on board? Know what we're doing? So right, what's this?
Langsam, wutzig.
Okay, let's try that again. It's hard to do, right? There's a lot going on, but let's try another example. I have a library of examples here, and we'll just see what. Okay, let's try that again. Let's just do that really that opening gesture. Da, 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 right? It feels a little cringy having to do that, right? But it's actually an important skill for your conductor, for example. But try to do that. Da, 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 da. What do you feel when you do that? Write down. Yeah, it's difficult to produce them vocally. I don't know what this. Ah, the sirens are distracting. So do people feel comfortable with this example? I have a lot. Yeah, whistling works too. I just want to find an example that's comfortable with people. So just this opening gesture. Da, 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 right? What do you feel when you do that vocally? This is the point of this exercise. We're trying to understand the feeling of this gesture. Yeah, rushed is a great word. Diction is really important. We'll be having an exercise on that. So rushed is a good word. It's sort of breathless. It's a flourish. Let's listen to the rest of this and try to imagine what the physical, pretend you're a theater student, right? And imagine having to act this out, right? Right. So this is dramatic, over the top, loud, very sort of gallant, right? This is Guess What? Don Juan by Richard Strauss, right? I always describe this as like a guy who's bursting in through the door, like a double, like French, like two doors, right? And he's got this hat and he's like, you know, flinging it off. This is supposed to be a sort of ridiculous dramatic entrance, right? Um, and you start to feel that, like if you just listen, you can hear that, but it's a little harder. When you start to reenact it with your body, you start to feel that um action, right? Yeah, that's a good word. Startling, dramatic. Yeah, there's this surprise. It's I feel like the best way to understand it is just to sort of so that ba, da, 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 that's a very, I don't know, that makes me feel grand. There's sort of a grandiosity to that, right? So you learn things by trying through vocal imitation. You sometimes when I hear something, I don't know what's going on, I don't understand the emotion behind something, you can vocally imitate it then, and it sort of activates maybe your, I don't know, empathy. It's difficult to describe how these exercises work, but they're shockingly reliable as well, right? Like if you listen to now, let's say, um, uh, let's see. Well, let's let's try to stick with this for now. Uh, and kinesthetic imitation is another example where I was mixing this. You'd use both hands for that sound, right? You'd go you jump and then you'd use both hands like that and say like, aha, I'm here, the Don Juan who's going to hell at the end of the act, right? Or the opera, right? So you know, there's a reason why theater students and dancers, for example, um, will do these kinds of exercises. You learn something because you have certain emotions mapped to your body, and when you map the music to your body, you sort of can recall the emotions you had associated with those gestures, right? So, this is a grand opening flourish gesture, right? Okay, so hopefully you're starting to see that you can do a lot with your own experience in your own body. That's sort of the point here. Here's another exercise that's sort of fun. Generalized imitation with objects. So you can sort of simulate this sound with, you know, drums or like pots and pans to be sort of cliche about it, right? So, right. So, you can do all sorts of things like that. And all of this is just trying to translate your auditory imagery into different modalities, right? So these aren't, they're sort of silly exercises in a sense, but if you're an alien and you're looking at what the human is doing, there's something very interesting, right? You're translating something in one modality to another modality, right? You're hearing sound and you're now converting it, you're converting it to like kinesthetic or proprioceptive data, right? That should be very strange, right? There's just already so much in that observation. If you dig deeper. Okay, so we just have to move a little quickly. That's why we're rushing through all this. Maybe just as see how you do with this Koenig, which is an example we'll listen to again. Okay. Let's listen again. So I'm hearing. So there's like, it seems almost impossible to do, right? But if you just listened, you might think this is noise, right? But if you start to vocalize this, then you start to, it might open up for some people the gestures or language in this music. That's Gottfried Koenig's function growl. Okay. Yeah, it's going to remind most people of noise, and I'm going to be playing more, modernist examples soon, but it's really an interesting experience to, if you haven't listened to electroacoustic music, to recognize the aestheticity in that. So this is a very difficult piece to listen to. I just played you something that's, very difficult. But uh, here's a Webern, right? Wish I could hear my own music. I'm just not able to hear my own music. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, it's very okay. I'm just playing some examples for people, and I'm getting a little. Okay, so it's basically 3 right now. Trying to figure out how much we've got left here. 13. Okay, so the next exercise is going to be a little clearer. It's called the ABX subjective listening test. and it's a standard subjective listening test used by psychoacousticians and audiologists and people who work in, you know, music perception and all of that sort of cognitive science of sound and music, right? So a subjective listening test is just when someone plays you a sound and asks you a question about what you heard. That's basically it, right? And we're gonna see how important this tool is. But this is a standardized one, very, very standard. I'm going to be playing for you some noise music. It's not just noise, it's music. This is by Curtis Rhodes, a composer at UC Santa Barbara. And listen to this, and audio is just so difficult right now. Okay, is everyone on board? Is everyone still here? So I'm going to be playing for you some noise music, and it's just going to sound like noise, but just have fun, okay? So just listen, and I'm going to be playing for you this. I'm going to be playing for you the sound one time, and then I'm going to be playing it again. No, sorry. Let me be clear. It's on the slide, so I'm just going to say what's on the slide. So the ABX test consists of 3 different stimuli. They're 2 different stimuli. Okay, there's going to be one sound that is, I don't want to tell you what I did to the sound because that'll give away too much. But I transformed the sound somehow, and then there's the original sound. Okay, so there's the original and the transformed sound. That's A and B. And then I'm going to play a sort of a mystery sound, right? This X sound. And your goal will be to type in chat whether you think it's A or B, okay? So it'll be clear which one is A and B. I'll play you A right now. And you can rank your confidence on a 5-point scale. Like you can put your percentage. It doesn't matter, right? Like I'm 50% sure this is A or 90% sure this is B. Okay, let's do it that way. And let's just see how well this goes, because this is going to be a little subtle. So just be prepared to listen very carefully. Okay, everyone's ready? This is A. Okay, that's it. This is B. Oh, did people not hear anything? Did people hear nothing, or did they just hear? Oh, I see what happened. Ooh, painful. Okay. This is, I never realized how difficult it would be to do all these things. Okay, how about now? Better? Great. That's A. This, sorry. This is B now. Okay, did everyone hear those two? Was that too fast for everyone? Was that too subtle? Do people see that there's a difference? That this is already a good question. Okay, kind of. Very subtle difference. There's a little difference. It felt sort of fainter. This is how subtle I want people to now shift their mind into. Very obvious for some people. Okay, great. And for some people, they didn't hear a difference. I'm going to say that might be your headphones. It could be because you're playing it on speakers. It could be you're in a room where the acoustics dampen or reflections are sort of filtering the sound, right? So I'll play them for you again because it's not like it's not a test, right? But yeah, if you're on headphones, you're gonna hear this very dramatically, I'm sure, because if you're hearing it through speakers, it'll be hard. So I'm gonna play A for you again. Okay. And this is B. Oh shit. Sorry. I don't know if I got the wrong that's B. Okay, can everyone tell the difference? And does everyone know which is A and B? Okay, great. So it's very simple. ABX is very simple. I just want to show you how simple it is. It's just, which one is this? A, right, great. People don't even need the percentage, right? It's obvious. And which one is this? Yeah, it's A again. Okay, that's a trick question. Okay. Which one is this? Okay, B, right. So people you're all on board with this. You're hearing everything. That's all the ABX test is. It's literally, you'll hear two sounds, and then you'll hear a mystery sound, and you'll decide which one it is. That's an example of a subjective listening test, what we just did right now. And there's a lot of other kinds of tests like that. And what we'll see is that this is the basis of a lot of data, a lot of facts that we've learned, for example, equal loudness contours. So two alternative force choices, another kind of test. I sort of want to move quickly through these because we're out of time. And some of these you'll just pick up just by reading this. So two alternative force choice is where you hear let's see how they define this is okay. So it's almost simplest to say two alternative force choice is when you have to decide whether something is alternative one or alternative two. So which one is brighter? Which one is better? Which one do you like more? Which one is quieter? Which one is louder, right? So it's a little different than ABX, right? You're being asked which one is more quality X, right? Or quality. Actually, that's a way of thinking about the ABX test, right? But quality X, but quality, brightness, right? Which is brighter, right? So I think that's clear. I won't dwell on that since it's obvious. HRX is high resolution comparison. I want to play for you now. I have. I'm going to do this again, and this is sort of going to be. This is going to be sort of like a Mushra test because I have 4 different versions of this. You recognize which one this is? Right, it's A. Now, do you hear any difference between that and this one? Okay, so just think about that. Here's another one. If you're on high quality headphones, you might hear these. Do you hear a difference with this one? I do. And then do you recognize this one? I'm sort of DJing this right now. So the endings, if the endings are different, it's just me, right? But try to listen to the actual quality of the sounds. And because I'm sort of trying to play this back very, you know, I don't have my full. Okay, right. And then here's another one. Right. So do you hear all those different examples? They're slightly different, right? So I'm going to play for you now. So some people can't hear them, but some people can. So first of all, I think that's interesting in itself. It could be your audio setup. It could be, yeah, sounding more muffled is a great way of describing this difference. Um, It could be just you're in a room where there's a lot of background noise. There's a lot of ambient noise, like a very high noise floor, right? It could, there's so many reasons, right? But that's an important point. You know, the ISO standard for equal loudness contours literally has to specify what headphones you use, what environments, like everything, right? Because this is actually what matters when we do this sort of very careful listening test. You want to be in a same environment, repeatable circumstances. You don't want to be listening to the police sirens outside my window. Like all these little details matter. So that's actually very important. And I'm going to play for you my much more carefully made comparison. It's hard to talk about this. This will make very clear the differences in the sound, okay? So listen now to this sort of montage that I've made. Does everyone hear the differences now between the four examples? I'll play it again. Okay, one more time. Okay, so everyone's comfortable calling those 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, so which one is this? Oh, shoot. Am I playing this in the wrong point? Let me see if I can. So actually, just again, let's call these 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Right, and then now we're hearing right. 2 is correct. And what's this one? Ooh, no, this one isn't 2. I'll play another one. Okay, now people are starting to get confused. Here's just somewhere in the middle of one of the others. Which one is this? No, actually that's not. It's okay. But okay, so I'm this one is one. This one is four. This one is two. And let me see what the so this one is two. Okay. Anyway, you get the picture that there's these subtle differences. I filtered the sound, and this is just an example of how there's different there's a lot of things that can be said about this experience that can be learned from this. I'll just say it's difficult sometimes to calibrate oneself without that reference. I'll say this a bit better. It's difficult to remain calibrated over long periods of time, right? Like if you asked me tomorrow, well, which one is this? And I played for you number two or number three. I don't know if I would know the difference between that and in number one. So it's just sort of yeah. And if people want to see what I did here, I'll just share my screen and you can see the audacity here. What I did was I filtered each of these sounds, you see. So this is the Curtis Rhodes piece. It's called Anamorphosis. Here's the spectrogram. And as you can see, this is the original. You can see it's got a full spectrum sort of full spectrum noise here, right? Then you can see it's filtered, right? It's filtered at around 10,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz, right? So I just filtered that randomly. Then you can see this is really filtered. There's a different structure of filter bands here. And this one is just more filtered, right? And when I play this, you can hear the pitches are different. I don't think this is going to work. When I play the Zoom audio, let's see if people can hear this. Okay. Right. So you can see the differences in your experiences of that corresponding to what you're seeing. Okay, generalized. So just this. Okay, hold on. I need to share my screen again. Sorry, we're sort of rushing through some of this now. Generalized subjective listening tests, right? These are something I'm working on, which is just trying to generalize away from all these very specific tests. These are very reliable standard tests, but just think about how many variations you can come up with of subjective listening tests, right? Just think back on all the, we talked about mental varieties of mental acts, right? There's so many things you can do with your mind. I could have said, well, listen to which one is more reminds you more of a certain headphone. Like if I gave you a pair of headphones that had a certain EQ, I forget what it's called now, but every headphone has a different profile, right? If you're an audiophile. There's there's so many things you could do that are based on this. And I hope that just opens some people's eyes to just how much you can learn by using your experiences, right? So here's an example of something that, scientists in labs. Sorry, that was a really cheesy thing to say, but don't feel that this is somehow unrigorous. The equal loudness contours were discovered this way, right? Equal loudness contours are they describe how volume depends on pitch. So if you, I don't have an example for this. I guess I could whistle one, but if you have a, so pitch is on the x-axis here and intensity level is on the y-axis. Have people seen this before? You can just put yes in chat if you have.
Yes, we talked about this in our
Oh,
first
okay,
lecture.
great. So I don't need to explain, right? But how is this discovered, right? How on earth does someone discover that there's a contour from, that feels like 70 phones or sones? Like, how do you learn that sort of thing? Well, it's actually through subjective listening tests. People have headphones and, you can do this yourself. I think there's an exercise. Maybe you did it in this class even, right? You can recreate the Fletcher-Munson curve pretty easily, the lowest one, by using a sine generator and from silence, lifting the volume slightly to where you can just hear it and doing that at different frequencies, different pitches. And you'll be able to recreate that bottom curve very, very, actually pretty well. I think we did that in Miller's what class here. So you're using your ears. That's first person data. And there's no way to get that, as at least currently, from looking at the brain, looking at third person information, right? That's something that you have to introspectively access to be able to come up with this curve. That's where this curve came from, and that's what's captured in this curve. The subjective experience of statistically, the population of people. Bats have a totally different experience of sound, right? They're, we hear this dip because we've evolved to hear like infants crying or something like that. That's like the speech. We're especially sensitive because of speech. So your subjective experience of sound is shaped by evolution by so many things, right? When you listen to speech and you can't make out certain words, maybe because consonants are in higher frequencies and you can't hear the tack sounds. That's, okay. That's something you can, I guess, infer from the equal loudness contours. Okay, so that's an example of something learned from subjective listening tests. Another example of something learned from subjective listening tests are a lot of illusions. Diana Deutsch discovered many of the illusions on her website here. Diana Deutsch is a professor here, well known for music psychology and discovering all kinds of illusions. Just, think about visual illusions where, you can't tell whether something's a rabbit or a hare or, there's two faces in a cutout, and are you looking at like a vase or two faces, right? Like there's all sorts of silly illusions like that visually, and there's the same thing for visual illusions. We can listen to one briefly. I'll just try to go through this quickly. Speech to song illusion. This one's a sort of fun example.
The sounds as they appear to you are not only different from those that are really present, but they sometimes behave so strangely as to seem quite impossible. But they sometimes behave so strangely, they sometimes behave so strangely, sometimes behave so strangely, sometimes behave so strangely, sometimes behave so strangely, sometimes behave so strangely,
Okay, now
sometimes behave so
everyone have an unusual
strangely,
experience hearing this?
sometimes behave so
I don't want to bias
strangely,
people. I didn't explain what this
sometimes
was,
behave
right?
so strangely, sometimes behave so strangely,
Like Kendrick Lamar. Yeah.
so
So this is the basis of actually a lot of music. What's happening, right? Well, you heard speech and you didn't, maybe we didn't pay attention to the prosody is what it's called, right? It's we didn't pay attention to the pitch or the contours, you know, the dynamics. But when you hear it again and again, repeated listenings are very important. Then you start to hear these notes. You start to hear it as almost musical, right? I think that's because Diana George speaks musically, and you know it's called prosody. I do not speak like that. So if you replayed my speech, it would make more like noise music. So okay, now which I'm happy with. So I gotta stay on track here. I got about 40 minutes left. So, oops. Um, okay. Oh, uh, correct. So this is the slide here. Take a look at these. There's a lot of other really interesting ones. Like, for example, um, um, I can't remember one off the top of my head right now. So just take a look at that website here. If you want to have it, I'll copy the link and put it in chat. You can just save it. And just it will work on certain headphones. These illusions will work better with headphones in general, but some people might hear them, some people might not. You might find some stronger than others. That's again another important observation to make, right? And again, these are illusions only because people listen to their feelings, like about the sound. There's no way to know this by, you know, studying the acoustics or the sound itself, the samples and the waveform. There's no way to know that, even if you study the brain. I don't think we have the tools yet to actually be able to confirm that, oh, that person's going to hear an illusion if you play this sound. It's just something that you can only learn through firsthand, first person subjective experiencing and introspecting. So I just again want to emphasize the irreducibility we're building up to sort of. I'll give away the punchline. So later. So yeah, perceptual illusions, alternating tones. Yeah. So I won't go over this. You can look at it yourself. Another example of how subjective listening tests are used are perceptual coding in MP3s. So you might have heard about this, but some audio formats are lossy and some are not lossy, meaning wave files have all the little data points. It's called pulse code modulation. You know, there's every single sample building up this waveform just in a text file, literally, right? That's a wave file. And you have enough samples to recreate the sine waves to Nyquist, you know, frequencies, I think like 22 uh, kilohertz for our hearing, right? And that's where you get the 44 kilohertz, 44.8, I guess, kilohertz in our audio formats, right? You always wonder, well, why do we have that sampling rate? It's because of Nyquist, right? And your hearing. It's a perceptual fact that's where that 44.8 comes from. You only hear up to about 20 kilohertz, right? That's the highest frequencies that we hear. So, but the point here is that that's not that. It's that we hear all sorts of things like masking. Masking is when if there's a really loud sound and then there's a quiet sound after that, we might not hear the quiet sound. There's different kinds of masking. There's temporal masking if something happens too closely or in certain there's spectral masking if things happen too close together with pitch or in certain configurations, right? So masking, I'll just sort of say that. MP3 removes a lot of data that it assumes you won't hear. So if you look at an MP3 file and you look at a WAV file, you'll see that some of the high frequencies are cut off and all that. So you know how they confirmed that MP3 was working the right way? Again, subjective listening tests. They had people, you know, testers, basically, like taste testers for, you know, chip brands have taste testers. Like they like, oh, does this taste good? Is this, you know, the McDonald's flavor, whatever, right? So they had people do that same thing with MP3s and say, is this faithful to their WAV file? Is this faithful to the, you know, the original sound? And they would rank it and so forth. So they use subjective listening tests to sort of fine tune the MP3 codec. So that's just some important stuff to know. First person data has always been used. So the point here is that subjective listening, subjective data in general is irreducible. Subjectivity isn't just noise or, you know, irrelevant to science, right? Science isn't some dispassionate, you know, pursuit of a view from nowhere, unbiased and by, you know, subjectivity. It's all objective. I mean, sure, but also subjectivity is a natural phenomenon, right? A consciousness is a natural phenomenon that's subject to natural laws. Experience is subject to natural laws. It arises and obeys natural laws. And, you know, these are sort of, I shouldn't be saying those things so with certainty, but that's sort of my argument. Let's put it that way. My argument is that we should take subjectivity as another kind of data, and your mind, your experience is just another instrument that produces outputs. When you ask someone a question, the responses are, it means something that a person chooses a certain word. It means something that you feel something, and there's an objectivity to subjective experience. I don't know if I have it right now on this slide, but I might need to jump ahead to show to point out. But you know, for example, the example was man, okay, well, it was gaslighting and self-deception. Just an example of the importance of taking subjective experience seriously and as being objective. In other words, you feel happy or you don't, or maybe you neither, right? But if you do feel happy, then there's a truth to that, right? It's objective. It's not, even though it's subjective, it's also objective. They're not mutually exclusive. And if someone is saying, well, you know, you don't feel happy, right? That's called gaslighting. It's a denial of something internal. And there's no way to sort of grapple with that except by just being certain of your subjective experiences. So there is an objectivity to subjectivity, and it's quite important. Okay, so I couldn't find the nice slide on that, but yeah, let's just move past this. So we already did this. I'm just gonna go past this quickly. You can think of sound in terms of units. For example, the Beethoven is we won't listen to that again. I think we heard enough of that. Let's do something. Right. So this is Kurtag's Stella. This is, you know, you can think of those two little things as units, right? That's all that this is about. And something that I'm doing in Musant is is codifying rules for talking about music like that, right? So if we can labeling units of sound. If this is going by too quickly, just, lift what you will from this and extract what value you can, because we have 30 minutes to go through a lot. Pre-interpreted versus interpreted. I'll just briefly say you can describe sound factually, and then you can also describe how you feel about it. And that's all that's all I mean by pre-interpreted and interpreted. For example, this sound is quiet. It's quiet, right? That's just sort of a factual, that's just a fact about the sound. We can just talk about the sound in that level, or we can say, well, it's also sort of unsettling, right? It's a little, it's not ominous, but it's sort of dark and somber, right? So those are a personal interpretation, right? Those are different mental acts. That's the point for that slide. Okay. Actually, let's keep with that example, and I want people to come up with a word, just one adjective, describing this sound that we just heard. Come up with just one adjective. Suspenseful, that's a great word, yeah. Dissonant, that's actually an interesting one. Yeah, there is actually a lot of dissonance in the sound. That's maybe why it feels sort of tense, right? It feels ominous because there's a lot of tension, but there's tension because the frequencies are certain frequencies are close together, and that produces sort of a clash in our ears. That you can talk about like the basilar membrane and two frequencies are too close together in the same critical band or something like this, right? But whatever the reason is, you feel that it's tense, and then it's quiet, right? So why does it feel spooky and uneasy and mysterious, right? Mysterious is a good word because of certain auditory features, right? So diction is a very important way of converting experiences into sort of hard data. And don't, feel it bad. It's very difficult to come up with the right words. Everyone did a great job with this. And yeah, expectation. What's interesting about this piece in particular is that there isn't any resolution. It's just suspenseful right to the end. We won't listen to the whole thing, but so coming up with adjectives is very important, and in timbre analysis, in timbre semantics, right? These are some examples of words, right? Strident, harsh, percussive. And there's this axis, right? Brightness and then warmth. And, you might think that strident is somehow different from dark, right? They're on opposite ends of the spectrum here, and crystalline is different from warm, round, and rich, right? So we have words that have semantic meaning, and the semantic interpretation ties to your experiences associated with those words, right? Or the meaning beneath the word, right? Or in the word. Brassy means semantically. So you're the semantic interpreter of these words, is what I'm saying. And so in timbre semantics, people have this free descriptor task where you'll hear these instruments, these timbres, right? And then you'll list adjectives that you associate with the timbre. Is it bright? Is it grainy? Is it nasal? So you just did that right now with this Kurtag piece. There's forced choice descriptor test. There's all the same things that you've seen in subjective listening tests, two alternative forced choice. Timbre semantics is based on subjective listening tests very much. Also tags, you'll have people will tag sounds and then they'll track sort of agreement between people. That's what intersubjective means, based on how the frequency, right? If everyone said that this was spooky, mysterious, ominous, one person said deep, right? So this is interesting, right? A lot of people said spooky, mysterious, ominous, and one person said deep, which is an interesting, all that is valid data, right? But it's an interesting profile that starts to show up for this word in terms of tags, right? You would have a really big word for spooky and then a small word for deep, right? That's, the concept map for that. So Tamra semantics is, doing very familiar stuff. And then there's some fancy math that people throw out at, but really the ultimate, evidence is subjective experience and being just very, very repeatable in the way that you're listening. And so I'm just going to just jump right over all this. Experiential predicates is just the idea, do you feel X or not X or neither? So, three value logic, true, false, and determinate. Yeah, gaslighting was here. Are you hungry right now or not, right? True, false, and determinate. Just type in chat. It's just a very simple question, but just want to show people that it's like there's sort of a truth value to this, right? Are people hungry right now or are they not hungry? You can literally just, if you don't want to type that in chat, that's fine. I am hungry. Right, moderately, right? So okay, so let's just get past all that to the what we've been doing is field work. We've been trying out different mental acts, all the different things you can do, right? You can listen certain ways, like attention is basically a big category. You can recall, you can reconstruct, and you can imagine new things. There's prospection, where you anticipate things in the future, basically, and retrospection. There's so many things, right? And the point is that we're trying to get to, that the punchline of this whole presentation is musical experience comes about from a certain procedure of mental acts, period. Like that's the point, right? And I want to illustrate this by showing you non-aesthetic modes of engagement. So a mode of engagement is just what it sounds like. When you engage with something a certain way. I'm looking at my computer screen right now, and I could look at, the font of, the slide, let's say, and okay, this is a serif font. It's sort of a silly thing to say, but, that's one way of engaging with it. I can also look at the word itself and say, engage. What does that mean to me? What are the associations I have, right? A mode of engagement means what mental acts are you going to apply, right? And you can start to see now that, oh, wow, is there a set of primitive mental acts? Is there a language of mental acts? Like, what's the framework? How do we codify this? How do we formalize this, right? Could we say mental act ABC, and then you get a response that way, right? So start to build off of what you've been doing and think about modes of engagement. Think about algorithms of putting these mental acts together. And I want us now to do this non-aesthetically. What that means is not grappling with art as art. In other words, think about a painting. This is a simple example. When you look at a painting and you enjoy it, that's aesthetic, right? Let's say there's movers and they are looking at the painting and they scratch the paint and they're like, oh no, that's expensive. I mean, they're looking at the paint, right? They're looking at the painting. That's not aesthetic though, right? And that sounds like a silly example, but it's so deep that I cannot overemphasize how important the aesthetic mode is versus the non-aesthetic mode, and how little people actually end up engaging with in an aesthetic mode. And it's not a bad thing, it's just very difficult to do. So here's some examples. Let's listen to some music non-aesthetically. So I'm going to actually play music for you, and I want you to listen historically, and I'll tell you some facts, and I just want you to hear the fact in the music, okay? So I'm going to play Bach, Well-Tempered Clavier, Prelude 1 in C major, and I just want you to listen to the recording. Is it a sort of a old recording? Is it a new recording? Let's just try that. Oh, well, sorry, wrong thing. Does everyone hear that? Okay, nice and clear, right? So how does that compare with Richter? Right? They're both very nice, but one of them is dry, right? The Gould, the first one. Right, the first one is dry. It's called dry miking, right? Gould was famous for dry miking. He had the microphone in the piano. I believe that's how it works. And he was just capturing the sound, no reverb, right? And Richter is playing this in a hall, and it's very different, the interpretation, right? It's more pleasant in many ways, right? So what we've done is something very valuable, but it's not aesthetic, right? What people are doing is already sort of engaging aesthetically, right? You're saying it's comforting, it's calming, that's an emotional engagement, right? But what I want us to really pay attention to is the recording quality. So again, so people are making good comments, but try to focus in the mode of a recording engineer, which I know is going to be hard because none of us are recording engineers, but just think about the recording. See, now if you're a recording engineer, you're going to be hearing things about the space. You're not going to be listening to the performance even. You're just going to be hearing the reverb of the second one and the dryness of the first one and certain balances of the whatever, right? Here's another example. Historical. Let's listen to Gould. And can you hear that he's sort of playing this like a harpsichord? Now let's listen to a harpsichord. Now, I don't want us to listen to this aesthetically. Just listen to how Gould resembles a harpsichord, okay? Don't force it if you don't hear it, but do you sort of see a resemblance? Right, there's sort of the way that he's playing the notes is sort of, there's a distinctness to each, the staccato, right? It sounds like he's trying to make it sound plucked, right? They're articulated, right? And compare that to the Richter now. Everything's smooth, right? So it's odd because the harpsichord is sort of phrased smoothly as well, right? So Gould is really the most articulated with staccato. But what I want us to again, the focus is we're not listening to this as music. We're listening as experts on historically informed performance, right? Put on your musicologist hat, your historian hat, right? Listen that way and set aside the aesthetics, right? And I just want us to really practice not listening in aesthetic mode, because it's very important to recognize when you do and when you don't. Here's Landowska. You hear how her harpsichord is it sounds very different from the modern harpsichord, right? One is very thin. This is Henstra. This is a thin sound, right? And then this is very rich sounding, right? That's because Landowska had her harpsichords handmade, and they're not historically trying to reproduce 1700s harpsichords. They're actually just her own vision of sound, right? Her own feeling of what sound should be like. So all these are just remarks, right? It sounds incidental, right? This is not really talking about the music. It's relevant, but it's not aesthetic. How well did Henstra perform this? The meaning of it. It's it's nice. I guess I don't know what to say, right? But then the Richter, it feels elevated and very, you know. So we're starting to get aesthetic, but we could limit this to technique and say, well, Richter is playing with more facility, right? So I'm belaboring this point because there's so many different modes of listening that are not aesthetic. There's historical, Gould. This sounds like a 1980s recording or 1960s recording. That's not an aesthetic fact about the music, right? It's a historical fact. And you can hear it in the music. It's intrinsic to the music. It's an audible feature, but it's not aesthetic. So now we're starting to ask, you might ask yourself, what does aesthetic mean? There's a typo there. It's when you engage with the music as music, right? And there's many differences in what people understand music to be, but I want to we'll see some definitions of music, but I will make the case here that when you listen to music as music, it's always personal and it's always immersive. It's not analytic. It can be analytic, and that can help accentuate your understanding of a piece, but true musical experience is immersive, which means that you're not self-conscious about the room you're sitting in, the uncomfortable chair you're in, the way that it's performed, and oh, that was, maybe that thought comes to your mind, right? But there's something much more important and much deeper and much more simple about how you listen to music. It's just what is Bach saying to you, right? What is Richter bringing out in the Bach, right? So if you can listen to this now, and I think people were already responding aesthetically. People feel that it's sort of calming, and it's also very sensitive, right? He's sort of sharing very personal emotion in this music, right? It's very moving because people don't usually open up about this sort of level of the feelings that they have, right? So this is very expressive. And Richter would have been thinking about this maybe in a religious context, right? Bach was also very religious. So these are sort of there's totally different dimension now of music and sound that we're talking about. The non-aesthetic mode is facts about the music that are not really about your experience of music as music. The aesthetic mode is everything to do with how you experience it as music. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to people? The difference between the aesthetic and non-aesthetic modes? We'll go over that a little more. I know we're running short on time. And Nelson Goodman's worth mentioning here. He's a very important philosopher. He's basically, the idea is that there isn't a absolute truth to a statement. It's always true within a context. So we make worlds by worlds of meaning is what he's talking about here. We make them by choosing to engage in certain modes. And then, the historical world of music comes about from engaging with music in a historical mental acts that get at historical facts about the music, right? But we could also talk about the music world, which is a very different world, right? And it comes about from engaging in a different mode. And both of those worlds are valid in different contexts. So world making is an important concept. I wish we could go over that more. He's the guy who came up with Grue and Bleen, in case you've heard of that before. These concepts, right? You could say something is green or Grue because it's, you know, green up to a certain point, then blue after that. The point is it's not wrong to say that something is green or Grue. It's not wrong to say that this cup is tall or empty or sort of blumpty, which is a new concept I just made up for a blue cup that's empty. Like, these are all valid concepts in a context. However, it's not necessarily useful or right in a given context. So world making is a very important concept for engaging with something like experience and music. Okay. We're just gonna have to skip over some of Nelson Goodman. So again, what is music? What does it mean to engage with music aesthetically? People have suggested definitions over history. There's still a lot of debate, but you know, Edgar Varèse, famous definition, organized sound. Why don't some people put in chat what you think about this definition, and if you think that it's sufficient and necessary, or if you think it's missing something. Here's a way to make this simple. Give me an example of organized sound that is not music. We're just going to stress test this definition, right? Give me an example of organized sound that is not music, because he's saying music is organized sound. What's an example of organized sound that is not music? Clock ticking. Okay, sure. Speech. Speech is the example that always comes to my mind. Organized sound is deliberately organized by people. That's the point. That's what he means by organized, but it's not music, right? Or we don't hear it as music. So I don't know if this is a necessary. I don't know if it's sufficient. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And we could talk about these other definitions, right? Some people would say that music is about tones, which I think is an extremely narrow conception of music, being in an experimental music program, right? Some people think that music is tonal music, just tonal music. If it's not tonal, you can't whistle it, or if it's not a memorable tune. They have all kinds of definitions of music in practice, and then they won't be able to hear John Cage, for example, as music. But what matters, the point is, when you choose a definition, what you've done now is you've operationalized that definition through mental acts. In other words, you can recognize whether this is music or not based on your definition. So choose a definition of music, your own so whatever definition of music you have, just think, is this music or is this not music? And I'm just going to play something for you. Is this music or is this not music? Now, I know it's not a fair question. It feels like we're invalidating someone's life work or something, right? But just for the sake of machine learning, just literally think of this as a classification problem. If you're a machine, would you recognize this as music based on your mental act of introspection of your experience, right? How about this? Oh, sorry. Curtis Rose, right, again. Metamorphosis. I sort of am, if you don't think it's music, don't feel bad. Just say, no, I don't feel it's music. Because think about this. Let me ask people to apply the very strict definition of tones. Okay, are there any tones in this? No. So basically, if we were applying that definition, it would not count as music. Now, those are very simple definitions. I want us to move just in the last few minutes to a very important definition by John Dewey. This is sort of the culmination. John Dewey, American pragmatist, very important, probably wrote the most important work on aesthetic experience, called Art as Experience. very comprehensive, deep treatment of the work. So this is not technically in the phenomenological tradition, but it is very phenomenological in what he's doing and his contemporaries with Husserl. So artists, I just want to get, oh no, I formulated it. I want to get right to the really interesting idea of an experience, okay? So this is something you can only verify through your mental acts. An experience, right? What does that mean? Experience is something continuous. Usually it's a flux. It's just all this stuff happening. It's everything. I'm hearing things. I'm feeling my stomach is, I'm hungry. There's so many things, right? That's just the flux of experience. All the stuff you're feeling. It's continuous. An experience is a discrete unit from that flux, which coheres as a whole. It's an integral whole, which means it has a beginning and an end, and all of the parts of the whole work together in a way to give rise to the whole. And no part can be removed without sort of diminishing the whole. And if we add a part, then the whole was a different whole, right? So what I mean by a whole, integral whole, is that it's made of many parts that work together. And some examples of when you don't have an experience are when the parts of your experience are in mechanical succession. For example, if that sound that you just heard wasn't relevant to my speech. Well, unfortunately, it sort of is because I was, referring it to it now, right? But it was incidental, it was an interruption, right? That someone has bad Wi-Fi connection, right? That's interfering with your focus on the lecture, right? So there's this idea of interference. Dewey talks about so many things, right? But mechanical succession is it's not about interference. I wasn't clear about that. Mechanical succession is when something happens one after the other, and they don't logically lead from one phase to the next phase. Imagine an opera where you just had the opening act of Don Juan, and then the second act was substituted by, a dog barking on the stage, and then the third act was Mozart's Marriage of Figaro and the ending. Now that could be an interesting postmodern work, right? But if you were prepared to listen to the Don Juan and you wanted to listen to the whole thing, then this would not really be a logical succession of experiences. And therefore you would not have sort of an intact experience, right? I don't feel I defined that very well for people, but do people understand what an experience is? It's very simple. It's just it's a colloquial usage of an experience. When you go to the dentist, you walk in the door, you sit in the chair, and that can count as an experience. It's not necessarily, but it can be, right? When you walk into a McDonald's, they've crafted their experience, right? Marketing and all that stuff. When you walk into a grocery store, as soon as you step in, you hear certain music, you're enticed by certain, food presented in front of you, right? All that is sort of an experience, right? It's not just related to music. It's something very universal in life, right? Thought can be an experience. When you work through a problem, a physics problem, let's say, and then you solve the problem, that's sort of a coherent experience. So think about this idea of an experience, and that there's so many different features of it. There's so many things you could say about it if we were trying to define it. But you just can also intuitively, I'm sure, grasp what it means. Dewey says there's this idea of consummation, where for something to become a full-fledged experience, it needs to be sort of have a certain aliveness to it, right? Think about when you order food in a cash register was it sort of an archetypal experience, or was it just sort of a something you didn't pay attention to, right? If it felt like, wow, this is an amazing food ordering experience. I walked in the door, I walked directly to my place. The person asked me how I was doing and took my order. I waited, I listened to the music, I got my food, I left, and that was just a perfect experience. You could say that's aesthetic. That's reasonable to say that's aesthetic. That's what Dewey is talking about. He wants to say that everyday experiences can be aesthetic if you recognize them, if you live them a certain way. On the other hand, if you feel like I hate having to get my food, I am hungry, I just want to get back to my books or something, and then you just rush in and you get your food, that's not an experience, right? It's incoherent. Maybe you didn't pay attention to what the person said, right? The defining factor of an experience is its unity. It has a certain theme to it, it has a quality that unifies it. He says a lot more, and I hope that I've just sort of sketched it out. It's important to talk about the structure of experiences. An experience is made up of little experiences, each of which is itself a unit, and then they work together to make this bigger unit. And that experience can be part of many larger experiences. For example, this lecture is an experience I'm having in my program, right? Which is a big experience, right? So you can think about the sort of mereologies, just the word, fancy word for parts and wholes, right? So think about an experience and think about, now I'm just going to play for you. Oh, was that an experience? By our simple definition, no. It cut off. It had no ending. The beginning was sort of, sure, right? So that doesn't count. However, if we listen to, oh no, I don't know if we have time for this, but I'm just gonna play this in the background, okay? Let's see this is. Okay, so that was Schoenberg. That was music, and I don't know if it was an experience for you, that's fine, right? But I want to show you how you can listen to it as a bunch of units, right? So this is one phrase. That's one little phrase right there. It's a little anxious sounding, right? It's like, it's sort of silly sounding. Yeah, there's sort of a ridiculousness to it. It's a musette. It's a little satirical, right? There's a bit of irony in it. Those are all feelings that you can have just listening to this, even though it doesn't sound correct, right? It doesn't sound like tonal music, right? But you see how you can still just listen to your feelings about this. What do you feel, right? A little nervous, right? And it's got these little bits and pieces. But you see, there's already a unit right here. This is why this is music. You can hear that as a unit, right? Dun, 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 dun. And you hear it twice, right? Da, 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 da. Da, da. Right? So when you start to get used to listening to Schoenberg, there's all these different units that are culminating into phrases and sections, right? I still sing now. So this is serialist music. In case people have never heard 12-tone music, like actually listen to it, it's very accessible. Okay, the point of that again was experiences. An experience is distinguished by its unity, and music is always, Dewey's concept of aesthetic experience. I want to be just careful, not rush. Dewey's Dewey's concept of aesthetic experience is that an experience consists of, it's a special kind of immersive experience where every single moment is self-sustained, self-sufficient. It's worthwhile. And, if you listen to Beethoven again, the sound itself is good. I'm just, going to say my, expert opinion, right? The sound is good. He wasn't just writing notes. You're not supposed to just listen formally. You can actually fully immerse yourself and listen. Yeah, that wasn't an experience. It wasn't an experience, that's correct. But you can immerse yourself in the timbre. That's the extent to which you can immerse yourself in this music. So I'm sort of getting into immersion. But okay, and just to wrap up, because we're at the end of our time, the final thing is just to say we spent all this time on mental acts, right, and audiation, all that. We're just at the beginning of a science that correlates first person and third person data, and that's the real thrust of that research is Varela's neurophenomenology. It's very recent work, not 2015 again, but it's something from the early 2000s, I think. Varela is the same Varela who came with autopoiesis and embodied an activism. So neurophenomenology, right? This is a very important field where neuroscientists are looking at the brain and then mapping them to first person interviews, literally questions like describe what shifted in your sense of time. Did your sense of, blah, 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 right? I'm just going to say we've already been doing more precise questions in many ways. Like musicians deal in a very precise way with their experiences. There's nothing, unrigorous about it. And if you could make an interview of all of those different mental acts that you're doing when you listen to, for example, a violinist adjusting the tone of his intonation, right? Sometimes you might be off tune, right? You might go, and then the next tone might be, right? Those are off tune. They're subtle, and you engage in a protocol or procedure of, is this in tune? No, it's not. I adjust my fingers. Is this in tune? Yes, it is. I continue doing that. I have to do the next thing. Is this in tune? No, right? That's not exactly how a person in real life thinks about it, but you are engaging in a feedback loop of action and perception continuously in music. It's the most intense. Your performance is supposed to make use of everything at your disposal, right? So neurophenomenology is an attempt to sort of bring out all of those subtle mental acts that musicians are doing, that you're doing when you listen to music, and see them in the brain, literally to see them in EEGs and fMRIs, and there's been a lot of progress for that. Okay, and I suppose we're out of time now, but if there's any questions, maybe if this is sort of a more speculative thing, but the absolute last thing I have to say, the last slide that we have here is there are people who are working on something called neuroaesthetics, which is the science of aesthetic experience. In other words, can you actually look at a brain and say this brain is undergoing an aesthetic experience? And so basically this is, coming down to consciousness studies and cutting edge research with, consciousness and whether there's neurocorrelates of consciousness, whether exterior and interior matter and mind and matter are isomorphic, right? Not sort of dual aspect more monism stuff. So, okay. So I think I talked enough, and I hope that was of interest to people. You can do a lot with your first person experiences, and they show up in your brain scans, so they're actually serious data to work with. And the point is just codify how you're doing things. Set up a contract with yourself or with other friends, right? And say, let's listen this way. Don't listen this way, listen this way. And then see what you come up with. Okay, that's it.
Hey, thank you so much, Matthew, for sharing and being our guest. Let's give the last round of applause for Matthew.
Okay.
Thank you for coming. Thanks everyone for attending. And also we are going to end our course this week. So make sure you submit all your assignment on time. And thanks everyone for enrolling in this course with me. And yeah, that's it. So
Thanks
hey,
for
have a
inviting
good day.
me. Yep, thanks for having me.